welcome to AC Studio. I guess that you'll be very surprised to see my review on the Ultramarines, Infiltrators and the Incursors. Well, these figures were released in September 2021 and that is, well, 1.5 years ago. So you're probably wondering why I review them now. Why? Now? Why?
Why?
And yes, I review them now because I only got them now. I only got them 2 weeks ago. And you're thinking, wow, you're late. I am.
And you're late.
What?
You're late.
Sorry, I'm late. Well, these figures were the very first licensed Warhammer figures ever produced by Joytoy. At the time, many collectors didn't know Joytoy that well before the introduction of the Warhammer figures. Back then, Joytoy wasn't, popular or well known until they acquired the license, or so-called the joint venture with Games Workshop. I knew Joytoy long before that, before Warhammer figures were released. And I have collected a few Joytoy's own line of figures, including the Battle of the Stars series and World War II figures. And I have videos on some of these figures in my channel long time ago. So if you haven't watched some of these videos, please check it out. You probably have watched tons of videos by other YouTubers ages ago. Many videos were made at the time these figures were released. So I'm not going to repeat what you already seen in other videos or what you have already known about those figures. Instead, I'm going to have a retrospective review. So that means I already have in mind what Joytoy is like, what their figures are like. Unlike those videos back then, look at Joytoy like it is completely new and unknown, right? Looking back at the very first figures will tell us today how they have developed their figure since. Have they put more efforts, into their recent products? Are they still as good or worse than before? Have they cut corners? So that it also means I review them in hindsight, only after it has been released long time ago and compared to the most recent figures. That means I can able to pick up what was not obvious at the time.
You turn the time circuits on.
When Joytoy announced the release of these Warhammer figures in 2021, I was super excited. At the time, I was working in Hong Kong, but was super busy with packing up my stuff and preparing to move back to Australia. So I didn't really have the chance to consider whether I should get these figures. I got these two sets from Toy Parts Hunter, which is a company under Locker Toys, I believe. They're selling these two for the price of one, so it was pretty cheap. But of course, it has been released ages ago. Price probably dropped down by now. The first thing that you notice back in those days, you have to get the whole set of figures. So you have to get a set of 4. So you have to get 4 of them all together, and you cannot actually get them separately. You can get them separately in eBay. People probably going to jack up the price and resell it. But so it was actually quite expensive back in those days when you try to get them. But if you look back on these figures, right, the individual price for each figures aren't very expensive. So if we divide it by 4, $25 US. So it's actually very cheap in those days, right? But the problem is, yes, you have to get a whole set. So it's a bit of money involved to get a whole set, right? But now, Joytoy selling them individually, they're separately packed. Yes, I know they're all separately packed inside, right? But the problem is you have to get a whole set, So you can actually get the one that you like. So that was actually quite flexible these days. And for cheap collectors like myself, I could actually pick whatever I like to save a bit of money, right?
Wow. You are so cheap.
So instead of buying, 8 of them, so I don't have to be forced into getting everything, spending a lot of money, Also, in terms of packaging, you can see, back in those days, they look more like, the Warhammer miniature figures design. Everything is actually in black, in dark tone, right? But these days, they kind of change it to a white, kind of like tone graphics, right? So they have this white color around this packaging. And yeah, it's okay, but I'm not a big fan of it. I actually prefer more like this. It's more like, Warhammer feel, Games Workshop feel, 40K feel to it, right? But okay, that's minor anyway. That's just my personal opinion. It is interesting that, in the Toy Parts Hunter website, they are supposed to be unboxed figures. So I'm not really sure why. I actually got brand new figures. I mean, when they mean unboxed, I believe they're just loose figures. So this is all brand new, like it comes in plastic wrap. I opened it already for this review, but yeah, I'm surprised I got them brand new. Just in case, I just want to say thank you to Toy Parts Hunter for sending me brand new figures, if that's the case. I hope it's not a mistake or anything like that. But anyway, yeah, so I'm pretty thrilled, pretty happy with this. For the Incursors set, I'm not too sure why I see many question marks. Maybe back in those days, they were planning to sell them separately in shops, but as a blind box, so you don't know which one to get, right? But it only, apply to the Incursors. But whereas the Infiltrators, oh, okay, that's funny. They have pictures for the figures. So, oh, that's weird. Not really sure why, but anyway, that's not the point of my video. But yeah, but you can see back in those days, the packaging are a little bit different as well. I actually prefer that, a black look, but that's alright. I mean, again, it's minor. It's not a big issue. And as everyone knows, the inside is always the same. They have this plastic case covering it, and today they are the same. They're using the same method. But back in those days, right, they always provide you a card, a collector card item. But the card is pretty useless, right? Because, it's written in Chinese, and no one understands it unless you use Google Translate, right? Some collectors like to have a card, but I personally don't really care. I just put it aside most of the time, as I'm doing it now. So looking back at these figures, right, at the time they still provide you, as of today, the 2.0 figures, right, they still provide you with 4 choices of hands. But back in those days, right, the hands are quite easy to work with, right? They're actually soft plastic, so it's easy to put the weapons in it, right? The 2.0 figures are different, right? They're very, very hard. I have no idea why they changed the size on the 2.0 figures. It just, don't know, like, does it mean that they got the wrong size at the beginning? So they realized, oh, too small, so they have to make it bigger?
Your driver's license?
Here you go.
So does it mean all the figures that we got back in those days are wrong, right? So we spent all the money on the wrong thing, right? Or they just want to change it, change the size of it. I'm not really sure. And another obvious difference is you can see back in those days, right? They like to paint light color to the edges, similar to how we do our minifigures, how we paint our minifigures. Just like how we paint our figures, right? We paint the edges in light colors, so we highlight the edges, right? So they don't do that anymore these days, right? They give it a black wash, I don't know, it looks like kind of a spray paint, right? Which I actually like better than this, and because this finish looks much more nicer to me, right? And it also makes the figure looks more expensive. It looks like they're much more classy, right? But this one they were not, but that's okay. Back in those days, I'm happy with it. In terms of articulation, they are the same. They're very similar. Well, actually, 2 figures are very similar. The Infiltrators and Incursors are in a different armor as compared to a Space Marine, so typical Space Marine. So I'm probably not going to, compare that. One of my biggest criticism, right, for the 2.0 figures, right, just like what I mentioned before in one of my videos on the comparison between 1.0 and 2.0 intercessors, right, is solder joint. You see, back in those days, the solder joints are amazing. You can see this joint can pull out, right? They don't have the pivot joint, but the pivot joint is to allow the arm to move into the body. But having this design, when this extension, right, you can actually do that either. Look at it. It's even better in many ways, in my opinion, right? And this is just, I don't know why Joytoy doesn't do that anymore. This is just really, really good. Look at that. That's amazing. And not many figures have this feature. Not even Japanese figures have the design like that. Some of them do. The high-end figures. The Bandai figures. They do that. And why don't they do that anymore? I don't understand. This design is perfect, right? This design really good. And I'm looking back at these figures these days, right? I think when Joytoy make these figures, they made them with heart. They made them, maybe because this is the first time they got this license, so they have to do it really, really well to make sure they got it right. And I don't know why they don't do that anymore. One of the most amazing find I just discovered looking at this 1.0 figure, and which I did not actually pick up, in my 1.0 and 2.0 comparison videos that I've done 3 months, 4 months ago. This joint is actually thicker than the current standard joint, so which they use in the shoulders. And if you compare them, you see the 1.0 is actually much more thicker, right? And I have a video to show how I fixed 2 of my figures with broken joint. So this joint has been an issue since, introduced, and a lot of people have this issue with it.
Oh! Oh! Oh!
But of course, it's not just a joint issue, it's related to the socket as well. The socket has definitely improved. You can see it can, rotate very smoothly. And it also comes with the clicking mechanism, which I know it has been introduced in the first generation blade guard, but because it was so stiff, and it breaks the joint. But now it doesn't break the joint. The joint, by the look of it, it looks like it is same width as the finned joint that I showed you before, but it's good. It's actually much better now. Socket has improved, so it's not about just the joint, it's about the socket as well. But it's still the pivot joint. But I'm not a big fan of pivot joint anyway. I still really like the original one. Pivot joint is good, but 1.0 is better. The original one's better. So when I play with these 1.0 figures, I always feel the confidence, to move the arms, it doesn't need to be really careful with it, which is pretty good, and it doesn't break, I can do anything with it. I can push it, pull it, whatever I like. Yeah, and whoops. Well, there it is. That's what happened. Anyway. Anyway, but it's okay. You can put it back.
Unstoppable! Ah.
You see, the legs tend to come off very easily, just like that one. It comes off very easily. But on the 2.0 figures, it's not that easy anymore. Nothing feels loose. Everything actually very stiff and nothing comes off. But no matter what, these figures, they feel more sophisticated. So I feel like the details are much sharper as compared to the later figures. Yeah. So I actually think the molding is better back in the old days. And lastly, the design that they have in the older figures, but they haven't used it since in the latest figures, is the ball joint shoulder pad design. So the shoulder pad was connected with a ball joint onto the shoulder. Instead, they used the let me pull this out to show you. They use the soft plastic strap on the shoulder pad and connect to the peg. Not a big fan of this. I have made a lot of complaints about the design of this because it limits the movement of the shoulder joint and the shoulders, and also you know, it's actually quite loose in some of the figures, just like Marines Calgary, right? You see, this is actually very loose. I don't know whether because of cost cutting or because, you know, the shoulder pad, they kept on falling down in the older figures, but most of my figures is okay, so I haven't really got this issue, right? The worst case is the Librarian, right? The shoulder pad is so loose, it keeps on dropping down, you know? You see, I just slightly flip it, it comes off. So everybody know that the quality of this Librarian is probably the worst one of all the Joytoy figures though. But I'm not too sure, is that the reason why, you know, they have to control the quality from different factories, so they make sure if it designed around the strap and it will never come off. So I think that's the reason. So now comes to the end of this video. So, you know, having this retrospective review telling us that Joytoy has pretty much spent whole year, 1 year, to improve the joint design. So the joint design are pretty much the weak point of, you know, major Joytoy figures. And they have, you know, finally improved the joint design on the 2.0 figures, or the latest, you know, figures, which is a really good thing. But in terms of the shoulder pad design on the Space Marine, I still think the older figures is much better. The ball joint is much better. In terms of quality, the quality is, yeah, for the last year, you can see they're very inconsistent. So some figures are not as good, some figures are good. You know, some space, you know, even Space Marine, you know, when they compare to each other, they varies as well, you know. The great news is, I think Joytoy has finally mastered the joint design on the latest figures. So we won't get any, you know, broken joint anymore, any, you know, figures with loose arms, you know, loose legs.
All the dinosaurs feared the T-Rex.
And I wish the future figures will continue to give us the excitement that we actually have in the first generation of figures. And lastly, for those who already got these figures and watched other YouTubers' videos 1.5 years ago, right? You know what? You're still willing to come in and watch this video, and look, you guys are just great. So I want to say a huge thank you for willing to take the time to watch the old stuff again.
I just wanted to say thanks. I'm glad you came along.
Yeah, and how about if you just let me know what you think if you got these figures after 1.5 years. Do you still love them? Do you still think they are some of the best figures ever produced by Joytoy? And anything happened to these figures? Anything broken? Well, please let me know. And I'll speak to you next time. Bye for now.